Hi everyone, I'm Hannah, as lovely Kate and Nella have just introduced me. I am currently a curator at ACCA, the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art. I am an Indigenous woman. My family come from up near Papamanati in the Northern Territory. My grandfather was stolen and taken to Alice Springs, so I have a big family there, and that's where I got started in the arts. So I tend to focus on artists in the southeast while I'm working on these lands. And I guess I'd like to acknowledge, because it is so important, that we are on Wurundjeri country, that here in the southeast with the Kulin Nations, this is really important to consider when we're walking through the city. It may not look like it, but this is someone's land and has been for a very long time. So I'd like to introduce Lisa first. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice? And
yep.
We'll keep moving around.
My name's Lisa. Thank you, Hannah. Lisa Waup. I'm a Gunditjmara and Torres Strait Islander woman, and there's also Italian mixed into that. I'm an artist. I work at an Aboriginal arts centre in Mornington called Baluk Arts. So there I'm the programs coordinator. And I'm also a curator, or learning curator, I should say. And so most of my work deals with found objects or objects through nature. And I'm a bit of a bowerbird, so I'm forever collecting bits and pieces. I'm fortunate also that I have family members and friends also collecting bits and pieces for my artwork. I actually studied at RMIT many moons ago, and studied printmaking and photography, so I do have a great love for paper still. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John. I started out in textiles and predominantly work with weaving before coming to an art practice. I guess I use a lot of found objects and kind of non-traditional textile materials in conjunction with regular textile materials. Yeah, kind of look at, I guess, the agency of objects and materials in my work. Yeah.
I'm Katherine Bowman. I'm a gold and silversmith. And I also have a mixed media practice and run my own business and teach sessionally at RMIT.
Thanks, guys, and thank you so much for joining me. Just to let everyone know, I was very keen when I invited these guys to come and have a chat with me, that we would have busy hands. There's nothing worse than having a conversation where you're just sitting there with your hands on your knees. So we're helping Lisa out by wrapping some bundles of emu feathers. And I was hoping, we did have Marie Clark planned for today. We were going to strip river reeds for her jewellery making, but Marie sends her apologies. So we're very lucky that Lisa actually already came prepared. She carries these with her, which is a sign of a good artist, I think. Material's always handy. So for me, I guess, as a curator that focuses on contemporary art, I've found jewellery fits in really beautifully into these spaces, and I think they have been, or the practice itself has expanded so much from growing up. I never really thought about what jewellery could be the way that I do now. I think for Indigenous people and a lot of the Indigenous artists that I know that make jewellery, they can be very loaded with cultural meaning, connection to place, connection to family. There's, of course, ceremonial jewellery, things like that. But I didn't want to focus just on that today, which is why I invited non-Indigenous artists as well, because I think the interesting part of jewellery making and storytelling through that is the intersections that we find across the practice, rather than maybe finding what's different, if that makes sense. And I'd be happy for, as we're kind of moving along, if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to do question time at the end, but feel free to jump in and if you've got something to add. So Lisa, did you want to tell me a little bit about your wearable collection, your artwork being transferred onto fabric and made into clothes?
Yeah. So in 2007, I did a fashion collection with Ingrid Werner. That was part of Melbourne Fashion Week in Waup. It was also through Craft Victoria and supported through Creative Victoria as well. So those images that were on the garments were actually from my visual diary. So it had been drawings that I had done for years and years and years. And they were all really connected with shields and I guess that protective element for me of with history and also country. So for me it's a real protection. And I guess for myself, the more I learnt about my history, which is really quite fractured, I was able to kind of not have these shields, which were originally in shield shapes. Then they started getting more fractured and became more line work, or for me it was like the thread of wood. So it's all very, very linear, and I guess that's where that really progressed from. And those images that were on those garments were all surrounded around family. For me, the circular motif it means family for me. So, and I guess that continuation and that gathering of more information as I went along. Yeah.
Yeah, I think embedding meaning in things is something that Aboriginal people have done for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's really beautiful to see that across not just Indigenous jewellery and adornment, but also Kath. I know that's such a central part of your own practice. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, before I did gold and silversmithing, I did a degree at Melbourne Uni. I ended up doing a double major in fine art history, so I came to jewellery with words. When I was studying at Melbourne Uni, all I wanted to do was paint and make things, and then when I started gold and silversmithing, I wanted to write.
Yeah.
So it sort of moves between these two things, but I felt that I didn't want to just make stuff. And so for me, I had to have a starting point from which I always move forward from, and for me, storytelling was the key. And my maker's mark is the Waup and weft of fabric. I don't have the stamp, my KB. And that was very important to me because I felt that a story that circulates is life. It's a living thing which moves and changes with people. And so meaning is not fixed. And so for me, gold and silversmithing answered my love of making, but it also allowed me to connect the made object with a human being. And I feel that that human interaction is, for me, the most essential thing of making. And so you asked me to bring something in. And I brought wax in. And what happened for me with gold and silversmithing was when I was introduced to casting, and casting is often maligned as a very simple, easy process, but it's sort of like when I found casting, I was able to explore tactility and sensory emotion through material, and that it actually, through the beautiful process of casting, ended up with a hard material that was still able to hold meaning. So for me, it directly relates to textiles, and I'm incredibly influenced by textiles, which is the Waup and weft, and influenced by this woman called Trinity Minha, who wrote a book 20 or more years ago that I still reference, and she says, I've written it down here. She says, "May my words be beautiful and unwind like a long thread." And so this idea that the human beings are the story. So if I can try and capture abstract patternings which reference things to me, then that's carried on the body. So it's not just a fashion object, it's something that is innately experienced. Like Hannah has a ring, and I was exploring light, so flat surface. The edge has the warp and weft. So that for me represents storytelling. Underneath is engravings of feathers, which represents for me what is most sacred. And I thought it can just be this object that doesn't mean anything, or I can say, I hope for you, you can wear this intention on your body. And it was, so that is the crux of my practice.
Beautiful.
Really long.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kath. I think for all of us, there's something about wearing an object or somebody wearing it or owning it, activating it in some way and continuing that story. So with this ring, you've created something that has the start of a story maybe as well.
But the important thing was it was chosen for you by your partner.
Yes.
So that for me is as important as the physical object itself.
Yeah.
So that's a separate story that
beautiful.
that is engaged with the object.
Yeah, and I think I wear it with that meaning, and I'm aware of that every day, that where that comes from, both you and my partner, that was that gift. I think I am drawn personally to jewellery that means something to me. There's a connection there. I find that if I've got a scary meeting or something that I'm anxious about coming up, I'll tend to wear my Ninti beads, which come from Central Australia, and they smell like the earth still, and I know that there were some old ladies sitting under a tree burning holes in them to make them for me. There's that process is there for me, and I can get strength from that, and it grounds me. And I think, every item I think I own of jewellery has some kind of connection for me and tells some kind of story in that way. Do you guys have objects like that, jewellery like that?
I have this ring that a friend of my sister's made, and it was the first thing I ever traded weaving for, and I feel like it's kind of this map of me stripping back, being over the top with the way I dress, I think, because I used to have this piece of jet on there and a piece of hand-carved ebony, and I used to change rings every day and have a lot of different jewelry, and then little by little I just kind of grew this attachment with this ring, and I don't remember smashing the jet off, but I started realizing that this was a box cutter. And when I started using this as a box cutter...
Functionality.
Yeah.
Hello.
Well, then the ebony snapped off. And then I also realized with this double band that it's a bottle opener as well. And so it's got all of these ridge marks, and it's just much more utilitarian and stripped back. And I don't know, it definitely... I don't think I would still wear it if it was the same as it was nearly 10 years ago.
Do you wear it every day?
Every day.
I feel like that is quite an important part of...
Yeah, the only time I take it off is if I'm in a situation where someone's scared that I'm going to hurt them with it, and then I lost it recently. Luckily got it back, but I just became really aware of I didn't know that I do this constantly until it was gone, but like flicking my thumb on the back, but yeah.
Oh, gorgeous.
And that necklace I noted when you arrived is new as well.
Yeah, I bought this off my friend Audrey Tan. She's a jeweler artist over there somewhere.
Is she here?
Maybe not. This is kind of, I guess, a bit of a map of her everyday life kind of thing. There's some desk detritus rolled in resin, half a bouncy ball, some bus shelter glass, some wood from a wasp's nest outside her house, fitted with gemstones. So it's kind of,
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Well, I think this amulet talisman aspect of jewellery making is understood by most people. Like, I was here, I'm wearing this as a sign I was here, or I love this person, I'm carrying that sign, or water is so important, so blue will be worn. And that, I feel, for me, is the exciting aspect of jewellery, more so than the monetary value of the material themselves.
Yeah.
So the meaning is the rich experience of the piece.
I forgot to also mention that it's a charm for surviving Scorpio season.
Are you a Scorpio?
No, I'm a Leo. I know.
John, I know there was discussions happening or ideas that I heard about a while ago about you creating work that actually was kind of almost assigned a star sign in a way, or born.
Yeah, my old housemate suggested that maybe an object would have the properties of its star sign, and I was making something to wear, and I wanted it to be made in Sagittarius season. Because it's kind of a little bit antagonistic, a bit intuitive, full of opportunity, and I was going to embellish it like crazy, and then we rolled into Capricorn season, and I hadn't finished it. And
Stop it right now.
Capricorn's a little more practical, so that got a lot more paired back to...
As a Capricorn, I'm sure it was
practical.
quite a fabulous work.
It was.
Yeah. And Lisa, I know there's a lot of techniques that you use in your artwork that both jewelry and other practice that also comes from older kind of traditions of using materials.
Yep.
Do you see those as bringing stories with them?
Oh,
as
most
well?
definitely. So I think the first thing I can kind of think of was, I guess for me it's an amalgamation of a lot of history as well. So I did a big series of breastplates, and I guess, so I'm married to Papua New Guinean, so, and given bride price was big breastplates, and I guess there's other contexts for breastplates as well within Aboriginal culture. So for me, that series was, again, using found objects, mostly feathers. I use a lot of feathers in my work. For me, they're like missing parts of family tree, so I use it as a medium that has that connection for me to, that sense of belonging with country as well. But those breastplates were all about the connections between Torres Strait and Papua New Guinea, and the land bridges that were between the two of them, and also trade routes as well. So I guess that was a storytelling of how those connections come together, and through medium, through found objects. I love using found objects. Yeah, I've done just recently using bottle tops. So I make these little brooches out of bottle tops. I think I've made thousands of them.
Yeah.
And my dad, who's 85, pounds them all for me. And that collection, that was I did a commission for the Art Gallery of South Australia for their membership. So we had to do 1,000 of them. Wow. And my dad pounded
Some big knives.
way over 1,000. Yeah. And it was a bit of a family affair as well. So I got my 2 daughters involved. My son a little bit, but not so much. Yeah. But that was, that idea of repurposing things or going past things that, somebody would just walk straight past and not even see the preciousness of it, or, just giving it another life. That's like with finding birds on the side of the road. I'm a bit of a finding roadkill kind of girl, and, for me it's like giving them another life, which then I weave into jewellery or to woven objects. Yeah.
And it continues them on. It's respect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
And I think there's something really beautiful about using found objects for things that are worn.
Yep.
And carrying them with you.
Yep.
especially when we consider Indigenous concepts of country
Yep.
and how important things in certain places are because they are from those places.
Most definitely. And,
Yeah.
you know, I've done many pieces where I've travelled around different parts of the country and I've collected and then created pieces from that country, or, you know, so it's kind of bringing things all together and, you know, that similarity.
And tell me about your necklace.
Oh, this one. Yep, this one's from Torres Strait, from Arab Island. So they do lots of weaving and jewellery as well, but with ghost nets. So it's picking the ghost nets that have been discarded in the ocean, and then they create sculptures from them. And they do the most magnificent work. So this one I got at Darwin Aboriginal Art Fair, and I saw it and I almost fell over. So there's like little bits of nuts and shells and little ceramic beads, and, you know, but the idea of telling that story of, you know, the preservation, I guess, of the oceans and to take care of them, and using something that's been discarded and creating something that's really quite magnificent and beautiful.
Yeah, I think there's lots of stories that can be told through jewellery, and that's, I mean, what they're doing with the ghost nets up there is just the perfect example of how to talk about really horrible things that are happening in the oceans and make something beautiful with it. Yeah, a vehicle to talk about those things. Yeah.
And, you know, I love the idea of wearable art. You know, like I go to these art fairs and, you know, there's 70 plus art centres from all over Australia with the most magnificent work I've ever seen in my life, and, you know, big, massive paintings, and, you know, so my budget kind of allows me for wearable art. So I have a wonderful collection of jewellery. You know, it's taking a piece from that area, or from, you know, that maker, and something that I really cherish. Yeah.
What also strikes me is that often these processes, and weaving and embroidery, often involves other people. And it might be that we all sit here and make this, but I'll happily give it to you for you then to make something with it. And so the dynamic of interaction of other people contributes to the whole. And that for me is just so important. You know, that often fine gold and silversmithing is more insular, but it does still involve other people and processes.
Yeah.
And I think weaving is, you know, this labour-intensive, time, incredibly time, I was going to say zapping, you know, absorption of sitting. Once you start sitting with people, then you don't know what's going to happen. You might talk about memory or the football or all of that goes into the experience of making.
Yep. And within that piece too. Yeah.
I think I've found that working with Aboriginal weavers is that it's a place when you're sitting down and you have busy hands, whether it's weaving or whatever you're doing. If you're doing it as a group like that, it's a chance for intergenerational learning. So you're not just learning those techniques; you're hearing all those stories. You're listening to and all of that goes towards building identity and connection, and I think that definitely played a role in me considering us doing something with our hands as well. I think there's a freedom that comes when you are busy like that to maybe say things and not overthink them and feel a bit safer and grounded. Yeah,
definitely.
In this book by Trinity Minha, she starts off with the example of an African village where people come together to discuss a very specific, important thing in their community. And so it might start at, say, 8 in the morning and it will go till maybe 12 at night. And everything will be, people will be sitting and drinking and eating and talking and discussing, the livestock, someone's affair, someone's use of material for their house. And by the end of that process, what the important thing that needed to be discussed had been addressed.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel that is it's not this empirical way of addressing something. And often weaving in that, it's like circling a story.
Yep.
It may never be answered, but it will change according to the people who are participating and the way they use their hands.
Yeah.
So someone might pull the thread too strongly and change the warp or something, and that becomes very precious with process and end result.
Yeah.
So I guess if we think about storytelling and jewellery, like we had planned to sit and speak of, some of the things that are coming out are that there's the incidental stories that are happening while something is being made. Are they possibly being embedded,
Into the
as well as
material,
the intentional stories? Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Well, I'm doing this clay class, and my teacher said, the way you touch the material is embedded in the identity of the clay. And I just think that's quite exciting, to think that there's a transformation of how you approach your material with the way you touch the material.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm working with kelp at the moment, so doing jewellery actually with some kelp which I've actually screen printed on. And so kelp the beauty of kelp is that it dictates how you use it. You don't tell it how it's going to look, it'll tell you how it's going to look. So I'm really playing with it at the moment, because basically when it dries it just warps and it just does its own thing. So I'm making them flat
While it's
and round, and trying to keep them in that shape. So it seems to be going well. Well, when I left it looked all right. We'll see what happens when I get home.
I kind of like that interaction with materials that behave the way they want to as well, because it's also almost like a little bit of ego gets taken out of it too, because it's the behavior of the materials and your hand working together.
Yes.
Well, you showed me a weaving that you did, and it sort of, and that was solely because of you playing with two things together that aren't usually placed together, and then it did this.
Yeah, so different
exciting-
fibers, once they have heat or water, behave differently, and if they're interwoven in different layers, one will buckle, and that'll cause the other to buckle. So, yeah, you're kind of left surprised.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of the kelp. You don't know what you're going to get. I love that idea, because a lot of materials that are used, like with printmaking, I guess there's a bit of an element of change in there as well, but you kind of know what you're going to get to a degree. But kelp, it's just, I love the idea that it tells you what to do.
But it also has a smell,
Yep.
don't you think? The material experience is sound, smell.
Yep. And the feel of it, and just how it changes, the colours. Yeah.
That ties back to the Aninti seeds. Having that smell creates that connection
memory.
and story and memory. Full sensory experience.
Yeah, I've been going back to using a lot of wool, but then when it gets wet, it reminds me of wet dog, but also high school, winter, which is not so great.
Yeah, I suppose it's hard to avoid those connections, whether they're good or bad, isn't it? I mean, I have a pair of earrings at home that someone made for me, which was so generous and beautiful, but I'm really not a fan of them and of the person. It's very cheeky, isn't it?
Well, it wasn't me.
But I don't wear the earrings because every time I see them,
Of course.
I'm like, oh, well, I don't feel like that making that connection, I guess. Yeah, so it is interesting, like how much you can separate that story from that object.
Yeah, I did a collaboration with Audrey who made this last year where we sat in the underpass at Flinders Street Station and took people's bad association objects so that we could remake them into other things. So I guess they had a different story, but my instinct with most of them was to act like an oyster. When they get a sea worm or a parasite, they'll just spit on them until it makes a pearl, basically. And so my instinct with the objects was to just cover them with layers and layers and layers so that they couldn't have a story anymore. I mixed them all up. I didn't know which one was which, so kind of...
Did you offer them back, or were they a part of the...
The non-pearl ones were from other people, and they all got getting in the process of being sent back.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
That's nice. That's like a public service. You should be sitting there every day. Everybody can just drop their little bits and pieces in. Look, I don't want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
We also transformed positive experience materials as well, and kind of to honor them as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't all negative.
Very interesting.
I suppose for me as a jeweler, and I use gold, and so how does someone who uses gold also can talk about weaving and feathers, because gold is so problematic as a material with the connotations that it has in culture, but also mining and then greed. And then I think, to publicly say this, can you say this? But I feel like every material has its own property, and gold itself is an exquisite material. It is luminous. I understand why it was revered in culture. That is my way into the material. And, I think as jewelers have to address the fact of the connotations of material and how it's used. And, I feel like I would make a lot more money if I did claw set diamond rings. But it's, you have to be very present with the way you approach your material and how you use your material. Maybe I'm publicly apologising for my use of gold, but I think my way of that is to hand make each piece new each time, and to use them, like I wish I just used thread and feathers in a way, but then I love metal so much that when I don't work with metal, I miss it. So it's this dichotomy of cultural meaning and acceptance of material and how you use it is a big issue, I feel, for jewellery.
Yeah, yeah. There's responsibilities.
Yeah.
And I think that's, Lisa can probably talk to that too, that there's cultural responsibilities with so many materials. Like even we're sitting here with these emu feathers, but I'm aware of a lot of weavers that won't use emu feathers because they might have a personal connection, cultural connection with emus that means this could be disrespectful.
Yeah.
So there's always so many considerations, and I think if I'm working with an artist that is using certain materials, I like to have that discussion.
Yes.
I like to know what their awareness of that is and what that story behind it is, and to incorporate that, of course, to be culturally aware, but it's the same with what you're talking about with gold. Like there's so many layers there that what is respectful and what are the responsibilities. Yeah, it's interesting.
And the archetype of a wedding ring, it's like, if you love someone, there's very few rituals left in our modern society. Yeah. Marriage is one of them. So the wedding ring becomes a sign of the relationship. And often I think, what you think is most precious, you put into that ring for those reasons. And so and it will wear. So metal is the choice for often things that are worn every day because it will wear. Yep. But then copper feels different to gold, and steel feels different to pearl shell. So we moving around what is precious for an individual, I think, is what you witness most with jewellery these days. Or like with Lisa Walker, your material is the meaning, the experience of making is very present in the choice of material and forms.
How are we going for time? I feel like I've just been lost in this little conversation. I forgot where we were. Oh, lovely. Very good.
So, John, you move between different mediums as well, and traditional textile, but also jewellery, and then sculptural work. Is there a preference for one over the other?
No, because when I work too heavily in one, I miss one of the others. I've been away from video for a long time, so I'm going back there. But I've been thinking a lot more about material choices and just reconciling using new materials as like brand new materials, as in like purchasing them firsthand. Because I mean, cotton production it uses a lot of water and pesticides, and it's kind of a bit problematic. And then the history that wool production has in this country as well. So, yeah, I guess it's in large part to try and get away from sourcing those things new or thinking about why or how I use them. But it's the beginning of the process, so I kind of want to go down to Mary Creek a little bit more and kind of just collect rubbish to use as material to get it out of there on the one hand, but to kind of map the walk that I do so often as well at the same time. But we'll see what happens there.
Yeah. Stories. Has anybody got any other stories about? Oh, please, yeah.
I was just thinking about the discussion and the importance of material, and I was wondering if anyone would like to talk about how they might approach storytelling in other ways, where they start before the material is connected with. So how one decides to bring material in, or what the story is that one might want to communicate.
For me, sometimes the story evolves whilst making it, or sometimes once I've finished it. Sometimes it's a thought and, a direct link to materials. So it kind of evolves along the way. Majority of my work has some sort of natural element in it. So it's something that I always gravitate around. So whether it be bones or teeth or, colours from the ground, and it just kind of evolves from there. Even, I guess with elements of drawing too, it kind of becomes landscapes or, imagery. Yeah, but I guess, I think I always kind of go back to it. It's my go-to. And it kind of makes sense. Things that I'm making make sense when I'm using, especially with feathers. I've been using feathers for probably near 10 years now, and I've kind of maybe branch out to different things, but there's always, I guess people are always giving me feathers as well, so it's something that I'm able to have a constant source of. But I have like little bags, who's given them to me, where it's come from. So I'm like, I'm making this, and this is Val's parrot, or, so it gives that ownership to different people and places, and, that kind of community that is used to create. Yeah.
I guess, John, you've sort of spoken to that when it comes to collecting things as well. Bit of a bowerbird like Lisa.
Definitely, but also, yeah, so another work was also with Audrey. We collaborated a little bit. We made a charm bracelet for a wall, and just some of the material, the material choice was based on the particular properties we wanted it to have. So I was living with some people who really put a lot of effort into having a good dinner every night. Like, it was really next level luxury. And so I'd like harvest their mussel shells from the bin, or to make like a charm for a good food forever charm, particular products, or like packaging for glamour charms, or it was more about placebos than anything else, but the material had to come from the kind of source that promoted that idea. Yeah.
I always start with the word or the subject, and then I go to my sketchbooks and work it out, and there will always be a material that will come up that will best allow me to encapsulate the idea. And so at the moment I'm exploring grief and longing, and I'm using clay. So I know that another material would not be appropriate for that. But for this instance, this is my material. And so then for a wedding ring, I often say, go to the most precious, because that symbolically will hold something as well. And you have one thing that is well made and strong with intention. So where it goes, what is it about, dictates the starting point for me.
So do you actually make jewellery for a specific person? Will somebody come and ask you for a commission?
Yes.
So would you sit down and talk with them and kind of...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And yes, it's quite an amazing experience, because people, they want to participate in the process, and they seek out the maker that will allow them to explore what they need to be explored. So I've made wedding rings for a couple who the woman was dying. She had a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they decided to get married. And so I sat with them for a very long time, and I did drawings. We talked about material. We talked about placement. I hand engraved names and motifs onto the rings, and they got married, and then she wanted 2 wedding rings to give to her 2 daughters. And so she died like 3 months later. So that for me is why I make production jewellery, because of the incredible experience of meeting with individuals to make something that they hopefully will wear every day. So recently, I'll just quickly tell you, it's sort of funny. This woman had no, maybe I shouldn't.
Maybe you should.
No.
Maybe now you have to.
Do it.
Her dog died. Am I allowed to say that? Or should we not talk about it?
No, that's fine. Please go ahead.
Anyway, this... Hannah's dog died. Sorry, Hannah. Sorry. Well, it might be nice for you to hear this.
All right.
She had her dog turned into a diamond. There's this process, and it costs thousands of dollars, but she loved her dog. Anyway, it's set underneath her ring, so she wears it against her skin. So this I move between different things with what people need to carry on their body.
That's beautiful.
Yes.
No. I actually did lose my beautiful pedicans lately. Sorry, not lately. That sounds horrible. 3.5 weeks ago.
Yes.
And he was 12 years old, and I loved him very much. And his collar was like a blue and orange color. And my partner had bought me a pair of earrings the week before, and it was a very unexpected loss. And they arrived a few days after we lost him. And I opened them, and they were peaches and keen earrings, blue and orange. And so I now wear them and and think of my boy. Like, those colours are so important to me now. And before it was just, oh yeah, that's Petey's collar. He thinks he's a little surfy boy or something with his orange and blue. But now it's so much more. There's a new layer, new story to them. Yeah. It's, yeah. I think sad, no, it's fine. I think sad stories like that, you know, it's, yeah, it's important to have things that remind you of these loved ones. Yeah. Yeah.
I suppose it's not just death that jewellery carries, but it is birth, transitions. I made a ring for a woman who just got her dream job, and so she decided she wanted a ring to wear every day to remind her she got her dream job. And it wasn't always a dream, but it still was a sign of something that she wanted to remind herself with a worn piece.
Yeah, wow.
So.
I think if we, you know, think about adornment, Indigenous, you know, people making things to remind them of certain things, to tell certain stories. I think the possum skin cloaks are a really beautiful example of that. I don't come from cold country. My family weren't possum people, possum skin cloak makers. But in working with artists like Marie Clark and Vicky Cousins and Lee Darrick and all these amazing women from the southeast that have really brought that practice back, I've learnt more about the cloaks, and I think the designs that each pelt are adorned with all come together as you get older. You need a bigger cloak. More pieces are added as important things happen in your life, so that when you're an older person, you have this extraordinary big cloak to keep you warm, and each part of it tells some story about who you are and where you're from. So they're not interchangeable. Someone's not going to steal your cloak, you know. It's a story of your life in lots of ways.
And lots of different hands have gone into the making of that, like the finding of the animal, the tanning, the skinning, and you know,
and the experiences that are then kind of documented as well in those designs.
And people coming together to create them as well.
Yeah, I always think of that with your work too, Lisa. We kind of touched on the idea that people are wearing your designs out on the street. Every time I see a jumpsuit, I'm like, oh, that's, you know, Lisa's design. I think of you. It's amazing. What does it feel like having people wear things that you...
I get really, really excited. Because for so long those images were 2D, and then they became 3D, and they moved and they interacted, and, you know, they kind of spoke to each other. And just, I guess, getting feedback from people too, wearing those pieces and how it made them feel wearing them. Because I know that I've been given a few pieces from that collection as well, or I have a few pieces, and I always feel a bit taller when I wear them, or, you know, just... My daughter's been really great. She's been wearing one piece. She needs a new piece. She's been wearing the same piece for quite a lot of things. And then she's pinched my piece. Like, mine was black and white. She's a red, so we got her a red one, and now she wears my black and white, and I'm like... you know, big frock dress. So she's been wearing it quite a lot, which is a real buzz to see.
Yeah, I bet. I suppose all of these things that are made to be worn, you know, that artist is always there. That where that comes from, it stays with you. These that I'm wearing today are Debbie Pryor's earrings. She's a good friend, and I work with her a lot, curate exhibitions when we can. And I wore them today because I know that she would love to be here. I'm making that connection all the time. Every choice I make, I think that's always there. Yeah,
I love that idea of wearable art. that, you know, you do have that piece of that person with you.
Yeah.
Or, you know, it gives you that little bit of strength for the day, knowing that they're with you, or, yeah.
I feel like we should look up now and look at all these lovely people around us. It's been a nice little discussion. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add or kind of question or draw out a bit more from what we've been talking about? It does all feel like we've just been in our backyard or something, doesn't it?
The kitchen table.
Yeah. Where all the good work gets done.
I'm not entirely sure how to throw this in, and hopefully I'll get it right. But I'm kind of interested in that space, you know, as a non-Indigenous artist and jeweller. I have great respect for both the rights and the histories of my Indigenous colleagues and people I know. And one instinct in your work is to tell that type of story. And how is that two-way street that happens between two cultures and not be seen as being disrespectful? Because materials really come into this. And if you think of Marie Clark, and I've had conversations with Marie about this, and you take just the kangaroo teeth, for instance, and for me to go and make a necklace in kangaroo teeth steps over that line.
Yeah.
And then Marie makes kangaroo teeth in 3D printing, which is sort of where I play in, let's say, or where my culture plays in.
Yeah.
But if I was to make a kangaroo teeth in 3D printing, you know, how does that sit? Is that still crossing a line?
Possibly. I think the best way around those kinds of discussions for me about what the boundaries are for makers into cultural areas, objects, is your relationship with where that comes from. So that may not be your culture, but I tend to be less cynical than a lot of people around me when it comes to those kinds of collaborations. And I think that can be a way to maybe access certain things that you're interested in out of cultural material, is by doing it as a journey with someone, a respectful journey in learning what that is. I think.
How do I tell my own journey?
Well, not through someone's cultural identity and property. Does that make sense? Like,
So how would
like,
how would
it
you
be,
tell my story?
How would I tell your story?
Yeah, I know you don't know me, but just, you know.
Well, as a curator, I would let you take the lead on that, and I would support you to do that. I think when it comes to, I mean, Lisa, please, jump in. But I think for Indigenous artists working out in the world right now, it's still not a level playing field.
Yeah,
so, for example, I'll go back to some of the weavers that I've worked with in the past. They will share their weaving, their coiling technique, which comes from the southeast and has travelled across the country with missionaries, that has inspired a lot of the weaving that happens around the country now that we know of. So they have certain stitches that they use, they have certain objects that they make, and they have certain materials that they use. So I know a lot of the weavers will have a workshop. They'll share elements of each, and then they'll talk to the group that they're working with and say, okay, you're welcome to create these baskets. Find your own materials. You know, if you're bringing those three elements together, that's problematic for me in sharing that.
Yeah.
Or use the materials, but do something else with them. Like that's an easy way to maybe break it down in a way. They're in good faith sharing something that has been around for a very long time and is embedded in their cultural identity and history. And then to share that, there needs to be some kind of acknowledgement that, okay, I don't want to be competing with you out there in a commercial market either. So if I'm teaching you cultural traditions in weaving, dyeing, whatever it is, I don't then want to see you out there taking space that an Indigenous artist could be taking with what you've just learned.
Yeah, I agree with that completely, and I really believe we need to listen to our Indigenous colleagues closely. I think we can learn a lot. But it still doesn't quite solve the problem of how, or not the problem, the difficulty of being a non-Indigenous artist and wanting to express my belief and my support without it being a crude Western interpretation.
I think that's just always going to be the dynamic to some degree. Relationships are really important, and bringing people in that you can continue these discussions with, that's the best that I can, I mean, Lisa, you've had some successful collaborations.
Yep.
I don't know if you want to speak to any of that as well.
I think the first thing that I thought of is at our art centre we've got an artist there that was wanting to create a piece that is definitely from another country. So I'm very much, don't touch it. It's not your story. I said maybe you could have the same kind of concept or the same material or the same, but your story. You've got to have it as yours.
When you say another country, do you mean another Indigenous?
Yeah, within Australia. So another state or another tribe, clan. So for her, she took on that information, and what she was creating, she flipped it. She totally flipped it around and created something and put her whole story, her whole everything within that piece. And then it became about her. And then it became really powerful because it was her story. It wasn't wanting to go into another mob story. She was really making it her own, And, that comes with materials too.
Yeah, well, I think the materials is a key aspect of it, and that's what you're talking about today, and how do you navigate that territory respectfully.
And a lot of discussion.
And still the materials still draw people to that idea.
Yeah, I think respect is the key, and just continue having those discussions. I think we just always have to remember that some things are always going to be off bounds as well. And, continuing those discussions, you'll find what is accessible and what isn't, and how to integrate maybe ideas beyond just materiality and so on. But I hope that gave you a little bit of something, have we got time for any more, or are we kind of, if there are any, I don't know.
Just on one thing, maybe one.
Oh, quick one,
I was just curious, because obviously when you as an artist are actually making the work, you've got a really clear story behind it, but how do you effectively communicate that to the intended user, or especially in the kind of growing digital world? So like if you were selling a piece online, how can you really tell that story and make sure that they understand and appreciate it?
I have no idea where to start with that. I feel like that's a whole other conversation. I think, I don't know, do you guys have like a really quick kind of first up response to that?
I think the wearer participates in what happens with the story after that. I think, it's not the artists anymore.
No.
You have to let go, I think.
I think it's what
and
people...
see what happens with it.
Yep. and what people see into it, their connections to it, how they read it. I think that's the beauty of art. You kind of see what you want to see from it. And then you can also get the description of what it's about and, you know, the artist statement. But what's your instant thought of when you first see something? What does it invoke within yourself? Yeah, I think that's the beauty of art. Yeah.
Thank you guys for having a bit of a chat with me about this today. I hope that's, you know, given you something to think about and more discussions to start. You know, come up to each of us after this or track us down somewhere to keep these chats going. But thank you, Nella and Kate and Eric and everybody for supporting us to be a part of this. And of course, Lisa. But yeah, thank you so much. Have a good day, guys.
Thank you.